6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness, brilliant. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, you're watching and listening to Andrew Pearce here on GB News, with you until 2 o'clock. Here's what's coming up. Nurses going on strike for the first time in more than a century yesterday, followed closely by the RMT. Is the Prime Minister doing enough to tackle industrial action? Is support falling for the rail workers? And the Harry and Meghan saga continues. The great whinge fest, in my view, as yesterday saw the latest release of their 6-part Netflix docu-series. A love story or a horror story? We're going to have a very detailed discussion on that. Plus, power-sharing disputes at Stormont. The Prime Minister heads to Northern Ireland for the first time to meet political leaders. Luckily, I'm joined today by Stephen Pound, who was, of course, Labour's Shadow Minister for Northern Ireland, and, of course, he is a former Labour MP. You at home, of course, an important part of this show. Email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk, and I'll put your points of views to those I speak to, and perhaps even get to speak to you live on air. Well, that's what's coming up this hour, but first, the latest news.
Good afternoon. It's coming up to 3 minutes past 12. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Passengers travelling by train are being disrupted by a fresh round of strikes today. Members of the UK's biggest rail union, the RMT, have walked off the job for 48 hours. That's after talks failed to resolve a dispute over pay and conditions. Services across the UK are severely disrupted, with no trains at all running in some areas. Passengers are being urged not to travel unless absolutely necessary. Union leader Mick Lynch says little progress has been made during negotiations.
We exchanged some ideas and some possibilities. There was no negotiation at that, and there's nothing arising tangible out of that. But what he did, having heard that as the facilitator, as they described themselves, and the people that ultimately own the purse strings, was he invited us and requested that we get together and hold further talks going forward. And we'll do that in the next period if the companies want to get engaged on it.
4 people are in a critical condition after a suspected crowd crush at a music venue in South London.
I've asked us to close the show. We apologize to you. This has nothing to do with us.
Police were called to the Brixton O2 Academy last night following reports a large number of people were trying to force their way in to a concert. The suspected crush happened during a gig by Nigerian Afrobeat singer Asake. The Met Police has launched an investigation and plans to review CCTV images of the incident. Labour's Andrew Weston has become the country's newest MP, winning the Stretford and Urmston by-election. The Trafford Council leader secured 69% of the votes, but with only a 25% turnout in South Manchester. Mr Weston claims the victory shows people are giving up on the Conservatives. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister says he's working flat out to try and restore the power-sharing executive in Northern Ireland. Rishi Sunak's in Belfast meeting Stormont's political leaders in his first visit as Prime Minister. Whilst there, he's also promoting the government's investment in shipbuilding in the city. DUP leader Sir Geoffrey Johnson says there's likely to be an intensification of talks around the Northern Ireland Protocol.
Clear at the moment, given the limitations of their negotiating mandate, that we're just not in the space where a deal can be delivered that really addresses the fundamental issues, and that for us means restoring Northern Ireland's place within the UK internal market.
British retailers recorded a drop in sales last month. That's despite online discounts and Christmas shopping. The Office for National Statistics says the volume of sales went down by 0.4%. It follows a rise of 0.9% in October. The ONS says department stores, though, did report an increase in sales, with a longer period of Black Friday offers helping. Retail expert Kate Hardcastle says the cost of living crisis is forcing consumers to change their shopping habits.
We've got so much fluidity out there. We've got a fickle consumer now who's shopping very much emotionally. They're not showing that same loyalty to the big brands. So no one can really rely on the sales coming through the door. It's down to the quality of goods, the value, service being a really important factor, and also inspiration, ideas. People still like the retail theatre in terms of the experience element. They're still proven popular despite the fact that people have been more watchful of their cash.
Ukraine claims Russia's planning a major ground offensive in the new year with a second attempt to take the capital, Kyiv. The country's defence ministers warned the attack could happen as early as January, suggesting Russia's been preparing 300,000 more troops. It comes after strikes hit major cities across Ukraine, including Odessa in the south, Kharkiv in the north and the capital. Kyiv says today's missile attack was one of the biggest since the start of the war. Back here, hundreds of schools and sixth form colleges will soon receive funding to replace dilapidated classrooms. The Education Secretary says 500 sites will be given overhauls as part of their school rebuilding programme. Gillian Keegan says the rebuilds will be environmentally sustainable, with some schools receiving triple glazing, heat pumps and solar panels. Speaking in Coventry, Ms Keegan explained the difference the cash will make to one school.
What we've done is we've looked at the condition of the school estate, and we've basically had bids come forward. So many schools have put forward bids. What they want to achieve here is they want to create a campus-style school with lots of new buildings specifically for specific purposes. So there's food tech, and there's a new dining hall. There's other facilities, classrooms up 3 stories high. So what they're looking to do is to transform.
And the world's largest freestanding cylindrical aquarium has burst in Berlin. The 25-metre-high tank inside a leisure complex was home to around 1,500 exotic fish. 1 million litres of water, along with the fish, spilled out onto nearby streets when it exploded. 2 people were injured by flying splinters of glass. Hundreds of hotel guests had to be evacuated from within the complex. This is GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Andrew.
Well, sadly, strikes are still continuing to cause disruption across the country as rail workers from the RMT union staged a fresh walkout today. Yesterday, nurses were on strike for the first time over pay and working conditions. And the industrial action isn't going to end anytime soon, with strikes set to carry on over the Christmas period, including postal and ambulance workers. Well, joining us now for an update on the rail strike is our reporter, Jack Carson, who's in Birmingham. Jack, how's it looking there? Because I've got to say, at Paddington Station in London, far more trains than in the last dispute.
Well, Andrew, here this morning there are still some services, but it's a massive disruption to the normal services that we see here. We've still got some running between Lichfield, Trent Valley and Birmingham New Street to Wolverhampton, for example, but it's just local services, really, but they're only running 1 an hour. So for cities like this, which has a lot of people that commute into it for business, this is one of the youngest cities in the UK, in fact, the youngest city in the UK, and so there's a lot of people that come here, students that need to get into university, so it's not just business, but here education is also being affected by these rail disputes as well. In terms of like the longer distance trains, the likes of Advanti West Coast, Cross Country, they're all cancelled today. We've got West Midlands Railway and London North Western Railway services here aren't operating at all, but there are some minor services locally running have been running since 7 a.m. this morning and 7 p.m. this afternoon. But of course, this disruption is going to continue and carry on. The RMT are in 2 disputes, one with Network Rail, where it represents 20,000 signallers and maintenance workers, and the others, of course, with the Rail Delivery Group, where it represents around 20,000 workers for 14 different railway operating companies. Now, of course, we've had those pay offers being rejected, and Mick Lynch tried to come to a compromise. He, of course, met with Hugh Merriman, the Rail Minister, yesterday, but of course, nothing really came of that meeting. But Mick Lynch saying that he's always optimistic and that resolutions to disputes are about compromises. He said, we understand what the companies want and they understand what we need, so we need some sort of compromise on the conditions that they're putting forward. There was a picket line here for members of the RMT that work for Network Rail, although I must admit only 2 people actually turned up for the picket line here today. But speaking to one of them, he rejected in that vote the pay offer that was put forward to them by Network Rail, but he kind of cited more conditions. He said he didn't want to strike. He said over Christmas, he'd much rather have the pay in his pocket, but causing this disruption, he says, was the only way really to try and start to get the message across, which is something that a lot of RMT members across are saying. But one thing he did mention was that it's that the actual services and that threat of possible driverless trains that they're not happy about, and the thing he mainly cited to me was working conditions and the conditions as well as the pay. But disruption, as you mentioned, is going to continue until both sides can come to the negotiating table and try and work out a deal that suits both sides.
All right, that's Jack Carson, GB News reporter in Birmingham. Top driverless trains, of course. Driverless trains, one of the big issues for Mick Lynch is, of course, he does not want one-man trains. He wants all trains to have guards. But, of course, 30% of trains already operate with just a driver. Well, we wanted to find out what you thought about the strikes in our latest GB News People's Poll. So we asked whether you would support the ongoing industrial action, and 44% of you said yes, you would, 29% said they oppose it, 14% neither support nor opposed. When asked who you blame for the strikes, bad news for Rishi Sunak, 37% blaming the government, while only 28% are blaming the trade unions. Here to share his opinion on the strikes is GB News political commentator Danny Kelly. Afternoon to you, Danny.
Good afternoon to you, Andrew.
Now, what do you think about the strikes? You support the right of workers to go on strike, but is your support beginning to wane for the RMT?
Well, I've never been in support of the RMT taking strike action, Andrew. It's curious that your colleague at Birmingham New Street went to a picket line, interviewed 50% of the people on the picket line by talking to one striker. So public support is waning. I think the support from the RMT union members is also waning, bearing in mind that 63% refused the pay offer of roughly 9% in real terms. They're saying that, obviously, with the the price of inflation and the cost of living, they want a great deal more. I'm perplexed at the GB News poll, though, Andrew, because I would have thought that people blaming Rishi Sunak, well, they've got selective memory, because don't forget, it's not the Conservative Party's fault that we had a pandemic. It's not the Conservative Party's fault that that lunatic Putin has invaded Ukraine. There are lots of external factors here at play, and I think the RMT, I think Mickey Lynch, Marxist Mickey Lynch, who I must admit, I do admire the tenacity on the bloke. I really do. I disagree with his politics, but I do admire his tenacious approach. Marxist Mickey Lynch reminds me of a DVD salesman in a Netflix streaming world. You know, technology, unfortunately, is going to replace manual labour. It's as simple as that. And he needs to just almost accept the inevitability of technology. He's fighting his Marxist corner very well, the proletariat against the bourgeoisie. It's great to see it play out, but it's only great to see it play out, Andrew, because I don't get the damn train.
Indeed. Danny, he's looking more isolated as well, isn't he? Because the Transport Salaried Staff Association working at Network Rail, they've accepted the pay offer, as have Unite. So two major parts of the rail industry have accepted that pay offer. And Mick Lynch's mandate, he says, is for a further 5 months of strikes, which is surely going to see popularity of the Lynch and the RMT plummet even further.
Of course, and the members can't afford it, Andrew. I think in the summer they lost, on average, £1,500 per person per striker. Of course, Mickey Lynch is completely isolated from any day's salary that everyone else is losing, because he's not on strike. He's in charge of the strike, but he's not losing any of his pay. So I think he is becoming more and more isolated, both internally and externally. I think the public are getting fed up with the strike as a whole, although, again, the GB News poll suggests otherwise. I think the nurses' strike as well, Andrew, I think that is such a tragedy. But if you ask for 19% pay rise, then you are going to be in a minority. You're not going to have a great deal of support. And also, Andrew, the overwhelming majority of NHS trusts didn't go on strike. And what I find really interesting, and I would love to know the answer because the nursing union so far haven't disclosed this, what percentage, what majority in those NHS trusts that did go on strike, what was the majority? Because the majority of NHS trusts said no. So what was the percentage? I bet you it was like a Brexit 48-52 split. Very narrow.
Great stuff. That's GB News political commentator Danny Kelly. By the way, I love your Christmas tree, Danny. Did you decorate it yourself?
Thank you. Well, it's actually one of those synthetic ones, and no, my wife did, and we have it on all year round.
I thought she probably did. Lovely to see you. Happy Christmas, Danny. Now, the Prime Minister is in Belfast today. It's his first meeting with Stormont's political leaders. Rishi Sunak says he's working flat out, they always say that, don't they, to try to restore the power-sharing executive in Northern Ireland. But he says, guess what? An imminent breakthrough is unlikely. Let's cross live to GB News reporter Doogie Beattie, who's in Belfast.
Hello and welcome to Stormont Estate, actually. Rishi Sunak met the party leaders here last night, just up the road from here in a hotel where he actually had the hustings not too long ago with Liz Truss. Who was she? We can't remember now, it's too far back. But he pretty much had a sort of get-to-know-you party up there to see who was prepared to give what was the mood music was and around it. Most of the leaders were saying it was a good chat, a good understanding of one another. Jeffrey Donaldson, although he thought it was useful, he wasn't too helpful or happy about how it has gone, and this is what he had to say.
Clear at the moment, given the limitations of their negotiating mandate, that we're just not in the space where a deal can be delivered that really addresses the fundamental issues, and that for us means restoring Northern Ireland's place within the UK internal market.
Well, you can see from that he doesn't think that there is going to be any movement here with the EU. And of course, Ursula von der Leyen was in Dublin just a couple of weeks ago. I was there. There is a lot there's a lot going on there in and around the edges, and there's meetings yesterday with the Foreign Secretary and the EU counterparts, Mara Seprovic. So there is movement going, but how far is it going? Rishi Sunak was in Belfast this morning at a shipyard. He was saying that there was about £1.6 billion worth of ships going to be built. Most of that will be in Belfast. I doubt that may be absolutely true, because yesterday there was a ruling in the European courts to say that Northern Ireland was inside the EU. Ministers here had no right to stop border checks of goods coming in. So if that is true, then those contracts would have to go out to tender. You're looking at 25% on British steel coming in, 1.5% on other goods coming in. There is everything that gathers in and around support, state support. Is that really there, or is this another tactic to try and put unionists under pressure here? Because on January the 19th, it is more than likely that Chris Heaton-Harris will set the date for an election in March. And if the unionists do not take the deal that is on offer from the EU, it may be blamed on them that they are losing more, because that pressure is very much coming on unionism the whole time. Nationalism isn't getting any of that at the minute, and unionism is actually kicking back on that.
All right, that's GB News reporter Doogie Beattie, who's in Belfast. Well, with great timing, I've got with me in the studio Stephen Pound, former Shadow Minister for Northern Ireland, who was, of course, a Labour MP. I think you also, didn't you chair the Northern Ireland Select Committee as well?
I was on it for about 20 years.
Yeah, you're showing the signs fit, actually, Stephen.
Thank you.
Now, this is Rishi Sunak's first trip to Northern Ireland. He must be pretty embarrassed because 3 years after Boris Johnson said Brexit is done,
I know,
that Northern Ireland is still operating in the single market because of all the restrictions. How quickly do you think this can be resolved? The Northern Ireland Protocol is hated in the province.
I don't think it can be resolved, and I'm sorry to be sort of depressing about this. When Rishi Sunak says he's working flat out, well, flat out to me means you're lying down in bed or something. I would say he might just as well be flat out in bed for all that he's actually going to do. Look, there's two huge issues here. One is the fact that Michelle O'Neill is de facto the First Minister in Northern Ireland, but the DUP will not go into the Assembly.
Because she's Sinn Féin.
Because she's Sinn Féin, and they will not have a member of Sinn Féin actually running the Assembly. So that's absolutely just visceral with the DUP. They just simply couldn't take that. So that is the big issue on this. The other thing is, if you actually forget about this sort of cross-border thing, the idea that there's some sort of preventative border in Northern Ireland, on the land border, then what on earth is that going to happen for European trade? Because there's no way that the EU is going to say that they can allow unchecked goods to flow in and out of a non-EU country, i.e. Great Britain.
Yeah.
Now, people talk about Sweden and Norway, because that's the only other example in Europe of a land border with a non-EU country.
Yeah.
But, I mean, there's about 5 crossing points on that border. There's nothing when you get up, towards Kiruna and up towards the north, and it closes at 10 o'clock at night. If you have a border from Donegal to Dundalk, 302 miles, with border posts, cameras, then you're going to have guards, you're going to have the people in uniform. You're going to go back.
You're going back. It sounds like the Troubles.
Exactly.
Let me talking of Troubles, the RMT, is Mick Lynch, who's had a pretty bad week with some pretty unfortunate injuries, is he turning into Arthur Scargill? Because public support is waning for this support. He's told us today he's got a mandate for another 5 months of strikes. He broke his word by waging industrial action over Christmas when he said specifically he wouldn't.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, he's actually got room to actually come out ahead of the game here. All he has to do here and now is to say, look, in the interest of the nation, in the interest of Christmas, let the bells jingle, and we're going to call off the strike.
He's had a chance to do that today, and he didn't do it.
But if he doesn't do that, then he's simply going to end up like the miners back in the 1980s, where you'll get small groups of people. You remember in the 1980s, the Nottingham miners went back to work. Yeah, the Durham miners didn't, the South Yorkshire miners didn't, then the Welsh miners gradually drifted back.
Well, a third of RMT workers are already working.
Exactly so, exactly so.
Is he Arthur Scargill?
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not. I think Arthur Scargill was a one-off, thank God. But Arthur Scargill is still here. He's on the picket line today.
Yeah. Is it difficult for the Labour Party, before we go to the break, and Sir Keir Starmer, because Labour is funded by the trade unions, not the RMT, but £15 million of trade union money has poured into Labour's coffers since Sir Keir Starmer became Labour leader.
Which is about a third of the amount of money that the Tories get from the hedge funds.
Yes, but I'm talking about the trade unions. You're waging the worst industrial action on this country for 40 years.
Well, some are and some aren't. I mean, the RCN is not affiliated, obviously. And incidentally, the nurses were on strike in 1978. Believe you me, there were plenty. But the RMT not only does not fund Labour, it actually stands candidates against Labour. So I think that the Labour Party is in the same situation as the Tories. Money has to come from somewhere, and there's always an element of who plays the piper calls the tune. In this particular case, the piper is not the RMT, it is not the RCN, because neither of them fund Labour. If they would like to fund us, I'm sure we could talk.
Do you think Labour MPs should be allowed to go on a picket line with the nurses? Because they're not allowed to, under Keir Starmer's modern vision of party democracy.
Well, I was on a picket line yesterday with the Communication Workers Union, mostly because they're friends and family, and because I think...
I think we'll have to come back to that, because I think you're mad. That's Stephen Pound, the former Labour MP. Coming up, we're going to have the latest on the Meghan and Harry fallout. Of course we are, after the final episodes of their Netflix whinge fest were finally released. I'm Andrew Pearce here on GB News.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Well, the fallout continues from Harry and Meghan's appalling Netflix outburst. The final episodes were released yesterday. Prince Harry said he was terrified when his brother shouted at him. My brother shouted at me all the time. It didn't terrify me. I shouted back at him. He also depicted the Queen as some helpless puppet. He said the Royal Institution was happy to lie to protect Prince William, but for 3 years they were never willing to tell the truth to protect him and poor Meghan. Joining me now is GB News royal reporter Cameron Walker. Cameron, Palace still not saying anything officially on the record. What are you hearing behind closed doors at the palace?
Well, behind the scenes, Andrew, I think it's perhaps a very different picture in terms of the courtiers' reaction to Harry and Meghan's series. I think I was in Boston with the Prince and Princess of Wales when the first trailer drops for this Netflix series, and it was very clear to see that they were very disappointed that the tour had essentially been overshadowed by yet another Harry and Meghan bombshell that had come across from California. I think the problem with this Netflix documentary is we're only getting one side of the story, and there are two sides to every story. Many people have branded it manipulative, but clearly, you know, we're not getting a response from Buckingham Palace or Kensington Palace on that front. So it's up to the viewers, I'm afraid, to make up their own mind.
Yeah, let's bring into the conversation royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams. Richard, did you sit through all of it?
I did indeed, all 6 hours.
For you. You'll never get those 6 hours of your life back.
That is absolutely true, but they are an unforgettable 6 hours. Talk about hypocrisy. Talk about invasion of their own privacy. The trouble is, this was not intended for the United Kingdom, where, of course, their popularity, as you know, is at a record low. In America and the wider world, a lot of people will see this, and they'll buy the fact that these are a couple who wanted peace and love and finding freedom. And what this is, of course, is obviously revenge, and it's very nasty, especially towards William, towards King Charles, and, of course, royal courtiers will be very disturbed to hear that they were briefing against Harry and Meghan. And, of course, one of the reasons for this, and this is all positioning, we can't prove it, is jealousy. The fact that Meghan was outshining them. All of this, it's quite an extraordinary record, as well as the fact that it's just amazing that they filmed practically everything that was going on.
Yeah, they even managed to film when the text arrived from Beyoncé, how spontaneous, and when the text arrived from Prince William. Richard, if you had to single out one particular issue in the last 3 hours, what would be the thing that stuck in your craw the most?
Well, I'm sorry to have to say this, but it was actually a rather touching tribute that Harry paid to the Duke of Edinburgh when he died. Now, I just couldn't help remembering that although Oprah hadn't been set up for the particular date it aired, and Duke was not in hospital at that time, they still went ahead with it, and there was absolutely no comment during it or indeed subsequently, nor has it ever been referred to, that basically when they put the boot in, so memorably, the issue of the royal racist, the issue of Meghan's mental health, the issue of being cut off financially, a whole series of issues, and the Duke was in hospital dying, and this must have been very, very difficult for the Queen. And indeed, Meghan was talking a great deal about the mental stress she'd experienced. In Harry's opinion, it was the press, the Mail on Sunday, particularly that dispute, that made her miscarry. True or not, the facts simply are that it is quite extraordinary to hear some of the views they put across, where always, whether they're in the small knot cot or whether they're in the sunlit Montecito residence, the facts are that they always tend to be in control of the narrative. And you mentioned, and this would have been very interesting, we mentioned the text from William that is filmed coming after the Oprah interview. Now, if they'd shown us what that contained, for the first time you would have had someone else's point of view. The entire 6 hours, a form of soft soap bought with a very expensive contract, but with the most ruthless control of the narrative. They will never be asked.
Richard, thank you for that. Just have to interrupt you there, because we can throw to a clip, actually, of Meghan talking about her struggle with her own mental health.
What she needed from me was so much more than I was able to give.
I wanted to go somewhere to get help, but I wasn't allowed to. They were concerned about how that would look for the institution.
They knew how bad it was. They thought, why couldn't she just deal with it? As if to say, well, you know, everybody else has dealt with it, why can't she deal with it? But this was different. It was really different. But actually, if you strip all that away and say, okay, fine, it was exactly the same. So do we still believe that she should have just sucked it up like other members of the family? Or does one think that maybe it's about time that we stop?
So that was one of the scenes from the Netflix documentary. Cameron, Prince Harry, as I understand it, is patron of at least 2 mental health charities. Are they really expecting us to think it was beyond their wit to find someone who the Duchess could have talked to confidentially about her struggle with her mental health?
People within the royal family have a huge support network around them. I don't think we can question what Meghan genuinely felt at that time. Clearly, mental health and suicide is a very serious issue. However, you are right in saying that Prince Harry has championed mental health for a very long time. His brother and himself founded the Heads Together campaign.
They did.
Part of the royal foundation, a very successful, actually, mental health campaign, which is still going on. So I think that's perhaps why many people are questioning why there was no access to help. And if there wasn't access to help, where is the evidence to back that up?
All right, that's Cameron Walker, who is our royal correspondent. Coming up, should free school meals be extended to all primary school pupils? A new rocket launch into space? I'd love to go to the moon. And a windless Blighty. Tell you more about that, but first it's your news update.
It's 12:34. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Passengers travelling by train are being disrupted by a fresh round of strikes. Members of the UK's biggest rail union, the RMT, have walked off the job for 48 hours after talks failed to resolve a dispute over pay and conditions. Services across the UK are severely disrupted, with no trains at all running in some areas. Passengers are being urged not to travel unless absolutely necessary. A man has been jailed for life with a minimum term of 23 years for murdering his work colleague. Ross McCullum killed Megan Newborough at his parents' home in Colville in Leicestershire in August last year. He'd been dating the 23-year-old for less than a month. Her family said they're the ones serving the life sentence when he was convicted on Monday. 4 people are in a critical condition after a suspected crowd crush at a music venue in South London. Police were called to the Brixton O2 Academy last night following reports a large number of people were trying to force their way into a concert. The Met Police has launched an investigation and plans to review CCTV images of the incident. The Prime Minister says he's working flat out to try and restore the power-sharing executive in Northern Ireland. Rishi Sunak's in Belfast meeting Stormont's political leaders in his first visit as Prime Minister. Whilst there, he'll also promote the government's investment in shipbuilding in the city. And British retailers recorded a drop in sales last month. That's despite online discounts and Christmas shopping. The Office for National Statistics says the volume of sales went down by 0.4%. It follows a rise of 0.9% in October. But they also say department stores did report an increase in sales, with a longer period of Black Friday offers helping. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Andrew will be back in just a moment.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, we're in the middle of an energy crisis, we all know that, and the government's solution is to pump billions of more pounds into renewables, particularly wind turbines. But they're supposed to produce 28% of Britain's electricity, but what happens when there's no wind? And I don't mean that as a joke, I'm serious. In cold, icy weather, there's very little wind. So renewables power sounds good, but can it be relied upon? We're going to talk now to the Conservative MP for Woking, Sir John Redwood. Sir John, I've read your excellent blog, and you make the point for a decade you've been asking energy ministers, how do you keep the lights on when the wind stops blowing?
Well, indeed, that is the crucial question. I've always explained to them that you need lots of backup power. In the short term, the backup power has to be fossil fuel. What's been happening in this very cold period is we've been mainly dependent on gas with quite a lot of so-called biomass, what you and I would call wood, and with some coal, because fortunately I and one or two others persuaded them not to close down our last 3 coal power stations, but to keep them on standby. And that rescued us from a position where wind sometimes was only doing 1 or 2% of our total electricity at a time when we had great need of it. In due course, it may well be that we can store the wind power when it is available in batteries, or we can convert it into hydrogen in a green way. Those are all possible, and I'm told that's what they're going to do. But we cannot do it at scale at the moment, and so we need gas power stations to back up the wind farms.
I think in the last couple of weeks, Sir John, the amount of energy we're getting from wind turbines has been 3%, and yet Rishi Sunak is going back on an election pledge, and he's going to build a whole new raft of wind turbine farms onshore. They're ugly and they destroy the countryside.
Well, he has rightly said that that should only happen where local communities think it makes sense. And of course, I don't think it's going to be the government building them, fortunately, because I don't think the government can afford to or needs to take that kind of risk. It will be a private sector decision. And I would imagine the private sector will only want to keep adding wind if it does have a solution as to how you store it or time shift it, because a lot of wind power at night is not a lot of use. A lot of windy days when it's quite warm is not nearly as useful as having some wind power when electricity demand shoots up in the winter. So they do need a way of shifting it around and storing it for when they really need it.
Now, the eco-warriors listening to this, Sir John, will faint at the very idea of you floating the idea we need more energy from fossil fuel. The government has given the go-ahead for that new coal mine in Cumbria. Should there be more of those, and should we be digging deeper into the North Sea oil fields?
Well, I'm very much in favour of us getting out more of our own gas, and I've been urging them to do that. There's some signs that policy is moving in that direction. Because, Andrew, it's not green to import the gas, and at the moment we need the gas. 55–60% of the electricity generated typically on a winter's day comes from our gas turbines. Far too much of that gas is imported. If you import it as LNG in liquid form, you create a lot more CO2 by the processes to compress it and to cool it and to transport it, and you don't need to do any of those things if you get your own gas out of the North Sea.
Stephen Pound into the conversation, Sir John. Stephen Pound, former Labour MP. Of course, this government is committed to net zero, which means the idea of more fossil fuels is a no-no. But Sir John Redwood's got a point. These wretched wind turbine farms often don't generate any energy.
Well, no, they're only a small element of the energy mix.
Well, they're meant to be 27%.
Yeah.
That's a big element.
Well, no, I mean, that's what they're aiming at. But, I mean, don't forget, these targets, 2030, as I've often said, my former constituents are more worried about 8:30 than 2030. They need to actually get moving. And a lot of them would also say if you put a wind turbine in Parliament Square, it'd be spinning around morning, noon and night. But the one thing that Sir John didn't mention, and he did, it's a very, very good comprehensive overview, is the fact that we're importing liquid petroleum gas at the moment from the United States. Why? Because they have had the good sense to go for shale fuel, to actually go for extraction, fracking, hydraulic fracturing, sensible, clean, long-term sustainable. They can do it in America, and all this nonsense about flames pouring out of the taps, it turns out to be absolute rubbish. We could actually be self-sufficient in fuel, and then who knows what in the future we could get, one of these marvellous new breakthroughs that we're hearing about from the Livermore laboratory. But right now, we should get fracking, and actually, instead of having gas coming in from America, we should export it to people. Why not? We've got the potential, we've got the skill, we've got the technology.
All right, Sir John Redwood, what do you make of that? Because you know better than I do that it was off the agenda. Liz Truss, in her short-lived premiership, put fracking back on the agenda. Rishi Sunak has now reversed that again, so there is to be no fracking. Would you support fracking in the United Kingdom?
Well, I think fracking is a very pejorative word, and it's quite true that when you get oil and gas out of certain reservoirs, you need to manage the reservoir. You may need to inject water. You may need to do something else to make sure that the gas or the oil you found does actually flow. But that needs very careful control so that it doesn't get into watercourses or do any other damage. There are good techniques for doing that. And that's exactly right. That's what the United States of America under President Trump did. And Trump turned them round from being import dependent into having an amazing surplus. President Biden actually disagreed with all of those policies, but he's now the beneficiary of them and is now happy to promote exports of that gas produced in that way. As I've said to you, I think our first target, which is less politically contentious, is just to maximise what we get out of the North Sea, because there is quite a lot of extra gas out there, new fields or gas in existing fields where more production wells and improved management would bring more gas ashore. That's a no-brainer, which I think most people should agree with. Onshore gas is more contentious because there are planning issues and relationship with local communities. But as with wind farms, I think where the local community accepts it, there's a lot to be gained because, after all, it would generate a huge amount of tax revenue and it would also generate royalties or contributions to the people in the local area.
The Conservative MP. Go back to you, Stephen Pound. Before the break, you said you were on a picket line with the Communication Workers Union. Are you mad?
No, I'm not.
These are the posties who are striking during the busiest period of their year, Christmas. Millions of Christmas cards are not going to be delivered. They're not going to people are not going to go back to Christmas cards. Turkey's voting for Christmas.
Well, you've touched on a very, very important point about people not going back to Christmas cards. The thing about these present ranges of strikes, it's very easy and it's very lazy to actually say this is just a totality, a winter of discontent. They're all the same thing. You remember what Tolstoy said about all happy families are happy in the same way, but all unhappy families find a different way to be unhappy. Each one of these strikes has an individual issue about them. In the case of the Post Office, in the case of the Royal Mail, we are changing the way we are now sending emails instead of postcards. So we should be talking to the posties, we should be talking to the Royal Mail staff. And it's not just necessarily about wages. It's also about conditions, about casualisation. Now, the people I was with yesterday at the handball sorting office, these are friends and a family. They're people I've known for years. They're also people who will actually note that somebody's not picking up their post and they'll notify the police. They do a social service.
Yeah, but Stephen, the number of people using postage use is down 60% already because the world is changing. This strike is going to mean the Post Office, which is losing $1 million a day, the Royal Mail losing $1 million a day, is going to have to lay off more staff. Don't they get that?
No, at the moment, about half the staff at my local sorting office are casuals. They come on for 2 or 3 days. And yesterday, when we were on
they'll need fewer of them.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry. We should actually be saying that this is an issue which affects, in many ways, the cement that binds together a community. It's organisations like the Royal Mail that actually make us a great country. If you can pay 95p to send a letter from Northolt to, the north of Scotland, that's brilliant. We should be talking about that. That's where the government comes in.
And one of something that unites communities at Christmas is the thud of Christmas cards landing on the doormat. That's not happening, and we're not going to go back to it, and that's going to be the Royal Mail losing one of its biggest chunks of work, Stephen Pound.
It will happen, and people will be at their post. I mean, it just won't be quite as quick as it was, and people have been posting them earlier. But the point I'm making
I haven't got my Christmas card from you yet.
Indeed, I've actually left it on your desk.
Oh, did you? Yes.
But, it was too big to actually put your letter.
OK.
But look, the reality is, if ever there was a time for the government to be talking to an industry, not just about, this sort of cliche stuff about, flat caps and braziers on the picket line, but actually about the future of the industry. Look, what's successful at the moment in deliveries? It's Amazon, it's Deliveroo, it's all these people. Why isn't the Royal Mail actually beefing up the parcel mail service? Why aren't we doing more of that? Why aren't we taking part in much more of the modernisation? I mean, the posties I spoke to are delighted to talk about modernisation, particularly at the moment when they have to actually face up all the letters in the morning. We should have modernisation. But just as simply to say that this is one of a whole group of strikes, I think it does our postmen and women a disservice.
That's Stephen Pound making a spirited defence of the strike with the Royal Mail, which I think is insanity. Now, in the last hour, SpaceX has launched a new rocket into space. It's carrying a NASA satellite. We could put Stephen Pound on it if he carries on like this, lifting off from California's Vandenberg Space Force Base on top of the Falcon 9 rocket. This isn't your usual satellite. It's a surface water and ocean topography satellite, otherwise known as a SWAT, something I was never known as at school. And it's en route to survey the Earth's surface water, investigating the link between our planet's water and the impact of climate change. Joining me now to explain all this is Dr. Maggie Liu, who's astrophysicist at the University of Nottingham and host of the Space Mog YouTube channel. Good afternoon to you, Dr. Maggie.
Hiya.
How important is this?
Well, I think it's very clear to a lot of people climate change is like a huge thing. I mean, this year alone, we've seen loads of flooding throughout the UK and then also hose pipe bans. And this has affected all of us. And this is the UK we're talking about. Just think about like the entire world. So climate change is a real thing. And this mission is just really, really cool. It's a Pathfinder mission. So the technology on board has never been like, we've never sent this kind of technology to space before. And it basically has these two antennae, and it has radar radar signals that it sends out, and they reflect it off the Earth's surface. And the time it takes for it to reflect back will tell you how much water is on the surface of the Earth. So you'll be able to measure the amount of water in water bodies to like centimeter precision. So that's really cool. The plan is that it will like investigate how water changes on our planet Earth over like bodies of water like lakes and rivers, how they flow, but also the oceans. We know that the drop in the sea levels is related to climate change. So understanding the balance of water on the Earth and where our water is going and how it's changing will allow us to assess climate change and the impact on our environment.
How long will it be in space?
So this is a Pathfinder mission, so it's going to be a first try. So if it works, it could be there for a long time.
Right. Do you want to go to space?
Absolutely. I think every astrophysicist dream is to go to space, and it's becoming more and more easy. I mean, like right now, Falcon 9 sent almost 200 rockets up to space, but next year alone, Elon Musk plans to send 100 more. So that's a half of what we've already sent up, right?
You need to get your application in.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just finally, how quickly do you think they'll be sending this information back to Earth from this mission?
So this mission's going to low Earth orbit, so it's not very far at all. So they'll be collecting, they'll be getting data from it within a couple of hours already. But the actual scientific return of it might take a bit longer to understand exactly what's going on.
All right, that's Dr. Maggie Liu. She's an astrophysicist at the University of Nottingham. She's the host of that very good space channel.
You could be the cabin boy, couldn't you, on one of these first space?
I'd be delighted if it got me into space. Yeah. Now, we've got 90
Thank
seconds.
You
want to have your say on Meghan Markle?
Well, you know, when I was a lad, this time of year, my dad used to go around the streets of West London singing, "Hark the Herald Angels Sing, Mrs Simpson's pinched our king."
Ah, the American...
because another American divorcee. And I have to say, you know, this sort of kind of...
Snared Edward VIII.
Indeed. Well, this Gwyneth Paltrow tribute act that we're seeing at the present time has actually achieved what I thought was impossible. It's made Mrs Simpson, who nearly brought down the country and destroyed the Constitution and knackered the whole royalty, she's made her look good.
So, we've only got 20 seconds. Do you blame her?
I blame Meghan, absolutely.
And what about Harry? Is he just a henpecked husband?
He's a sad figure trailing behind her while she says, "Protect me, Harry, protect me."
Yes, from a £27 million house in California.
Yes, almost in your class.
But you are an ardent royalist, aren't you?
Not anymore. I was when Her Majesty was alive.
So you're a Republican now?
I've had enough of it. I'm just tired, and the whole soap opera, I've had enough of it.
We haven't had enough of you, Stephen, but we are going to have to go to the break. You're watching me, Andrew Pearce. There's plenty more still to come. But first, we're going to get an update with the very, very cold weather.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather updates. It's been snowing heavily across some parts of Scotland. That is now starting to ease. For most, it is a dry and a cold day once more. Milder weather, though, is on the way, courtesy of an area of low pressure out in the Atlantic. But ahead of that, it's still cold. We've got high pressure, bringing most places a dry day today, but this low up to the northwest, and these weather fronts have introduced quite a bit of wet weather to western Scotland. Still snowing heavily across just to the north of the central belt, through the hills here, and elsewhere at lower levels, turning more back to rain. But still, things could be quite icy, and still, as I say, some snow to come. Much of northern Scotland dry, the odd shower for northern parts of Northern Ireland, North Wales, but for most it's dry, sunny and cold, with temperatures again struggling to get much above freezing. Now, as we go through the evening, we'll see more of this wet weather pushing into southern Scotland and then sinking southwards. Again, mostly rain at low levels, but some snow over the southern uplands, the Cumbrian mountains, and by the end of the night into parts of the Pennines as well. Further south, again, most places dry. Cold once more, widespread hard frost. Southeast England, East Anglia, rural spots, and northeast Scotland could get to negative double figures once more. So another cold day to come tomorrow, a cold Saturday with some wet weather over northern England and North Wales. Again, mostly at low levels this will be rain, but some snow over the hills, and it could be icy. So just bear that in mind, especially on those trans-Pennine routes. More snow showers over the Highlands also. Elsewhere, much of the south and much of the east will be dry and bright on Saturday, but another cold day. That is about to change, though, because low pressure systems coming in from the southwest are going to mix things up through this weekend. Going to bring much milder air, certainly, but also going to bring some wet weather too. And as that wet weather hits the cold air initially, on Sunday, for a time, there could be some snow and it could be icy, and then things turn wet and windy into next week.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online, this is GB News.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hello, you're watching and listening to Andrew Pierce here on GB News, with you until 2 p.m. Here's what's coming up. Strikes, and yet more strikes. The RMT are at it again, and the nurses are following closely behind, staging walkouts for the first time in over 100 years. We'll bring you the latest. Harry and Meghan, grown. They've released the second part of their Netflix series. Allegations of misbehaviour and even racism. Have they gone too far? We're going to have a detailed discussion on that. Plus, 4 migrants lost their lives in the Channel this week. Is the government losing its grip on illegal crossings? Does it know what it's doing? All that and more. So don't forget to email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk. That's what's coming up this hour. But first, the latest news.
Thank you, Andrew. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 1. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Passengers travelling by train are being disrupted by a fresh round of strikes today. Members of the UK's biggest rail union, the RMT, have walked off the job for 48 hours. That's after talks failed to resolve a dispute over pay and conditions. Services across the UK are severely disrupted, with no trains at all running in some areas. Passengers are being urged not to travel unless absolutely necessary. Union leader Mick Lynch says little progress has been made during negotiations.
We exchanged some ideas and some possibilities. There was no negotiation at that, and there's nothing arising tangible out of that. But what he did, having heard that as the facilitator, as they described themselves, and the people that ultimately own the purse strings, was he invited us and requested that we get together and hold further talks going forward. And we'll do that in the next period if the companies want to get engaged on it.
A man has been jailed for life with a minimum term of 23 years for murdering his work colleague. Ross McCullum killed Megan Newborough at his parents' home in Colville in Leicestershire in August last year. He'd been dating the 23-year-old for less than a month. Her family said they're the ones serving the life sentence when he was convicted on Monday. 4 people are in a critical condition after suspected crowd crush at a music venue in South London.
I've asked us to close the show. We apologize to you. This has nothing to do with us.
Police were called to the Brixton O2 Academy last night following reports a large number of people were trying to force their way into a concert. The suspected crush happened during a gig by Nigerian Afrobeat singer Asake. The Met Police has launched an investigation and plans to review CCTV images of the incident. Labour's Andrew Weston has become the country's newest MP, winning the Stretford and Urmston by-election. The Trafford Council leader secured 69% of the votes, but with only a 25% turnout in South Manchester. Mr Weston claims the victory shows people are giving up on the Tories. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister says he's working flat out to try and restore the power-sharing executive in Northern Ireland. Rishi Sunak's in Belfast meeting Stormont's political leaders in his first visit as Prime Minister. Whilst there, he's also been promoting the government's investment in shipbuilding in the city. DUP leader Sir Geoffrey Donaldson says there's likely to be an intensification of talks around the Northern Ireland Protocol.
Clear at the moment, given the limitations of their negotiating mandate, that we're just not in the space where a deal can be delivered that really addresses the fundamental issues, and that for us means restoring Northern Ireland's place within the UK internal market.
British retailers recorded a drop in sales last month. That's despite online discounts and Christmas shopping. The Office for National Statistics says the volume of sales went down by 0.4%. That follows a rise of 0.9% seen in October. The ONS says department stores did report an increase in sales, though, with a longer period of Black Friday offers helping. Ukraine claims Russia's planning a major ground offensive in the new year with a second attempt to take the capital, Kyiv. The country's defence ministers warned the attack could happen as early as January, suggesting Russia's been preparing 300,000 more troops. It comes after strikes hit major cities across Ukraine, including Odessa in the south, Kharkiv in the north and the capital. Kyiv says that today's missile attack was one of the biggest since the start of the war. Hundreds of schools and sixth form colleges will soon receive funding to replace dilapidated classrooms. The Education Secretary says 500 sites will be given overhauls as part of their school rebuilding programme. Gillian Keegan says the rebuilds will be environmentally sustainable, with some schools receiving triple glazing, heat pumps and solar panels. The world's largest freestanding cylindrical aquarium has burst in Berlin. The 25-metre-high tank inside a leisure complex was home to around 1,500 exotic fish. 1 million litres of water, along with the fish, spilled out onto nearby streets when it exploded. 2 people were injured by flying splinters of glass. Hundreds of hotel guests had to be evacuated from within the complex. And a SpaceX rocket carrying a powerful NASA satellite has launched to study the Earth's water in depth for the very first time.
3, 2, 1, engine ignition and liftoff.
The Falcon 9 booster, owned by Elon Musk, is carrying a special satellite to conduct the first global survey of the Earth's surface water. It'll measure 90% of our water from oceans to lakes and rivers. And it's hoped it'll shed new light on the long-term effects of climate change. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Andrew.
I'm sorry to say it strikes, and yet more strikes today. We're seeing more 48-hour rail stoppages. Yesterday, the nurses walked out for the very first time, and next week there's strikes amongst the ambulance workers, plus even more rail and nurses strikes. And let's not forget Royal Mail. It seems like it's never ending. Let's get an update from our reporter Jack Carson, who's in Birmingham. Jack, not many trains there, I suspect.
No, not at all, Andrew. We've got very limited services running here, but we're kind of really running one per hour. We've got some to literally all Trent Valley to Birmingham New Street, some to Northampton, some to Wolverhampton, but those longer distance journeys, those cross-country trains, those Avanti West Coast trains, just aren't operating today. West Midlands Railway and London North Western Railway services here are not going to operate today. They're not going to operate on any of the strike days where there's industrial action here. There has been a picket line here for Network Rail, although there was only 2 members from Network Rail and the RMT that actually turned up to show their support for the industrial action. Speaking to him, he mentioned obviously that the pay rise that they were offered wasn't good enough. Of course, we know that RMT members rejected that, but he also cited terms and conditions and how a lot of train companies now just don't put guards on the trains. That's one of the things that Mick Lynch is still calling for, and he kind of cited that there are passengers that do need assistance, that do need people to help them, but the fact is, without a guard on the train, that takes longer, and sometimes with unmanned stations there is a problem there. So there are some legitimate concerns from a lot of these union members that work in maintenance, work on the trains, that they aren't happy with. But for commuters here, the attitude from Birmingham has always kind of been, we understand the strikes, we understand why they want pay, but we're not going to lie, it does cause disruption for us. As the youngest city in the UK, there's a lot of people here that come here for business, a lot of people that come here for education that just are struggling at the minute to get to university and get to their school. But also, you've got to look at the time of the year as well. It's festive period. There's a lot of shops here, big shopping centres, and of course the Christmas market that every time this time of the year comes round, it's a big boost for the local economy. So these rail strikes do cause a lot of disruption, but Mick Lynch kind of saying that the only way we're going to get our point across is by causing this kind of disruption. He said that there are some very simple steps that employers and ourselves can take to get a solution to this, and that means a common sense approach. Of course, we know he met with, of course, Hugh Merriman, the rail minister, yesterday in a meeting, but nothing really has seemed to have come from that in terms of a further kind of discussion. We know that negotiations are going to continue, and Mick Lynch saying this morning that resolutions to disputes are about compromises, so we need to compromise on some of the conditions, but he says that is achievable in my view. But today here and across the country, disruption on the railways continues.
All right, that's Jack Carson in Birmingham talking about the rail dispute. In the studio with me is Christopher Hope. He's the Associate Editor Politics of Daily Telegraph. I sense, Chris, that the RMT are losing the public relations war here, and I'm just walking through Paddington Station to get here today. Unlike Birmingham, lots of trains running, at least until 6 o'clock.
Yeah, a Tory MP texted me yesterday to say he was on a train in from somewhere in the home counties and his driver was a hero. And I think a lot of Tories and maybe members of the public think that drivers who are working are doing what we're trying to do, which is work and get to work and not receive pay rises in double-digit numbers, aware that big inflation pay rises will drive inflation further higher and make it harder for us next year. So there's a view there that the people who are breaking, who aren't striking at all, are the ones who are the heroes.
Yeah, and 2 unions have now accepted the pay offer, the clerical ones, the Unite part of Network Rail. Has Mick Lynch just pushed his luck too far, the RMT leader? He's telling us today he's got a mandate for another 5 months of wretched strikes, and he broke his word about striking over the Christmas period.
People are working around it, and yes, indeed, he has. He views that Christmas didn't start until the 24th of December.
Which is ridiculous.
That's how he gets around that.
If you're a
conversation.
retailer or a bar, there's Christmas parties have been cancelled.
This weekend is a huge weekend for parties. There's a Telegraph reporters' party tonight. We're going to.
I remember how
got to
very
arrange,
well. I don't remember much about them because I probably drank too much.
Got to arrange a different way to get home. I mean, we get round it. We do. That's how we get by. But I think the way he's taking on often interviewers in debates rather than the debates that he's talking about. He had to go at Michelle Hussain for the Today programme, Richard Madeley, which maybe that's more understandable. But I think with the BBC Radio 4, questionable. I do want on other strikes. I think certainly he might be losing the battle. I look at the nurses though, and I look at the Express.
Hold that up.
Well,
because
it's
it's
a front page here from the Express. Now, this is a very loyal newspaper. You used to work there, Andrew.
Yeah, I did.
Very loyal indeed to the government. In fact, they're saying to the government, sit down, have a think. I was on the way here, I was slightly delayed by talking to a cabinet minister telling me that he thinks that Steve Barclay, the Health Secretary, lacks a bit of emotional intelligence, that nurses do occupy a very special and important place in our national consciousness, notably post-COVID. Before that, there must be a way of doing something more money for the lowest paid, bring forward how you negotiate, how you work out the pay for next year, bring forward pay for next year, do something, not the whole bang shoot, not all 19%, but something.
Yeah, because just before we go to debate, an independent pay review body gave the nurses £1,400, which is about 9.3% for the lowest paid in the health service. But the head of the RCN says it's not really independent, because the terms and references and the amount of money in the total pot is set by the government. Well,
that's how politics, the way it's calculated is set by the Treasury on their tables.
Do you think the government are going to blink first with the nurses?
I think this is the beginning of maybe a tweak. If they strike in January, it could be harder and harder, I think, to maintain public consent. I think the idea of strivers versus strikers, that's the politics. I get that, and that works probably with the RMT and other unions. With the nurses, they are a slightly special case.
We're just going to go into an item now about Meghan and Harry. I think they're ghastly. I've got to tell you, lost it completely, particularly the way they tried to project the Queen as some senseless puppet of Prince William and Prince Charles. She had...
That was Harry's conversation.
Harry's, yeah. She had all her marbles right to the end. One of the most wise people in Britain, prime ministers, flocked to her for the advice she gave. What's your view on them?
Well, I think that... I think it's a complete nightmare. I think that Harry had it all here in the sense that he had an appalling tragedy in 1997. I've known tragedy in my life, and I do know that the way you get through that is not looking back all the time, looking forward, how you can be positive. He had a chance for the royal family to help all manner of society, the homeless person outside Sainsbury, anybody, and he would have a chance to forget his own misery and help these people. Instead, he's stuck on a beach in California looking at his bare feet, wondering how it all went wrong and why no one loves him and how hard it is for him. If he could see other people what real suffering looks like, it would help him get over this.
Yeah, it's so difficult when you have these conversations in £27 million houses in California, isn't it? That's Chris Hope. We'll get more from him. Well, let's get back to the fallout from Harry and Meghan's Netflix documentary. Big revelations with Harry accusing of William screaming and shouting at him, and he was scared, apparently. Wasn't scared when my brother shouted at me, I shouted back. And he blamed the media for Meghan's miscarriage. Let's talk to Rebecca Reid, who's an author and journalist. Rebecca, have you managed to sit through the entire latest 3 hours?
Well, I didn't just manage to sit through it. The first thing I did when I woke up yesterday morning was put it on.
Right.
I absolutely, I would watch another 10 episodes of this.
Why are you so fascinated by them?
I mean, for me, it's the sort of Wallace Simpson chapter 2, and I've always been fascinated by that period of history. It really struck me, actually, that at no point in any of the most recent documentary did they mention that parallel at all. So I sort of infer that it's one that they don't particularly want to court or enjoy. But I'm sympathetic towards them. I have questions about their behaviour. I don't always like them, but I think it was an interesting piece of filmmaking, and I think it probably did what it needed to do, in the sense that we're talking about it again. My concern for them is what next, because they have now told this story in every possible way that they can, and I'm wondering what their next move is going to be in terms of generating more conversation.
Do you like them?
Yes, in spite of myself. I think I thought Harry came across as an incredibly likable person in the show. I've always felt that Meghan's problem is that she is very American, and there are characteristics of being very typically American that British people find very difficult. She's incredibly sort of effusive and in touch with her own emotions. I think she would say that she's genuine, but I think to us it comes across sometimes as fake, because we can't believe that anybody could feel that many feelings.
There's a vanity thing going on here as well, isn't there, Rebecca? The suggestion that other members of the royal family were jealous because she was more popular. She was more popular than people who were born to do the job. In other words, Prince William.
I think there's a vanity thing across the whole series, because I think they have become consumed by how people perceive them, and I think that there probably have been misunderstandings and injustices in how they were portrayed. But rather than shrugging that off and saying, well, we're in the media, people will believe things that aren't accurate sometimes, what they've ended up doing is fighting for the control to change that narrative. And the problem is there's only so many programs you can put out. They've done the Oprah interview and now 6 episodes. people will continue to think unpleasant things about these people because that's being in the public eye, and they will never be able to sit down with every single person who dislikes them and convince them otherwise. But it does feel like it really truly bothers them to be disliked, and I feel sympathetic towards both of them because I desperately hate people disliking me, and I think they are consumed by it.
She, as you say, she's American. What is it about her Americanism, do you think, that affects you? What is it you don't like about her? That's the American side.
I don't have a problem with it, but I'm the sort of British person who goes to therapy and talks about their feelings and, likes to make things look nice. And I find her aesthetic very aspirational. All of that really works for me. But I think people who like the fact that the Queen kept her food in Tupperware, probably didn't have the heating on, wore the same tartan skirt week to week, probably find Meghan's glossy, somewhat excessiveness unappealing. And also I think people really admire the stoicism of the royal family, that kind of put up and shut up attitude, and the never complain, never explain mantra that they have. I think all of that is very respectable, but personally I enjoy the drama. I think they are effectively just the Kardashians for people who have Argas.
But that's a very good way to end that conversation. Rebecca, journalist and author, Chris Reid in my studio is creased. Thank you for coming in. I'm going to talk now to Bush for a Shake, who's a former BBC Apprentice candidate and, of course, a long-time anti-racism campaigner.
Yeah.
Now, you probably heard what some of Rebecca said there. What's your take on it?
Gosh, there's so much to unpack here when we talk about the Meghan and Harry.
Yeah.
So much to unpack. And I've been thinking about this over the last 2 weeks. And, of God, we've had this for years. And one of the questions that I find that I'm always asking myself is, if Harry genuinely wasn't happy with the situation, why did it take Meghan to come into his life for him to make that move?
Or perhaps she made him realise he wasn't happy.
I don't know, because I don't know. Does it take another person to really show you what you want in life?
Well, I wouldn't have thought so. What do you make of some of the big allegations, how he was scared when his brother shouted at him in the presence of the Queen? Would you be scared if your brother shouted at you?
Usually, no. I mean, it seemed like they had, this kind of bond previously. What I see with Harry's is he actually has a lot of trauma that he's carrying with him. And obviously, when he talks about his mother, and we know about Princess Diana, so it's almost like he's still this boy, inside this grown man's body. So, I've sat there and I thought about it, and I'm like, Meghan's come into his life. She's obviously somebody from America. She's an actress. She has a whole different lifestyle. Was she really ready to join the royal family? Did she really know what it took to be a part of this very modest, conservative British household?
Apparently she wasn't told how to curtsy. She's an actress. Does she really need a manual guide on how to curtsy?
No, that was a joke. We all know how to curtsy, and I'm sure we've done it. Even as
Even I've
women.
curtsied. Even I've curtsied.
Yeah,
Chris Hope curtsied to me when he came in the studio.
Always.
As a woman of colour, do you think that Meghan Markle has been a victim of appalling racism from within the royal family? They've only got her version, of course, and they've not clarified at all what they told Oprah Winfrey, that somebody in the family questioned whether the baby would be more black or more white. And they've not clarified any of that.
No, and this is something that I was actually observing as well. For someone who's also an anti-racism campaigner, she hasn't really been that vocal about it. And she's touched upon it just slightly. And if she really was, if she was really trying to sort of put that foot forward, why haven't we heard more about it, even in this whole docu-series on Netflix? So, it's not that I'm questioning that. I'm not saying that she hasn't faced some form of kind of racial discrimination or anything like that. For me, it's about, if that really is the issue, then why haven't we heard more? But there is so much more to this story. I genuinely don't think that is just the angle, because, because she talks about the PR, she talks about the media, and they talk about that a lot, but they don't really touch on that kind of racism.
Well, I was struck by last night watching the programme until 1 a.m. I mean, goodness gracious, far too late for my age. But it was interesting how Harry, when he watched the programme on the documentary, the Oprah Winfrey interview, he was surprised that that race issue was the takeaway that everyone took from that interview with Oprah Winfrey. He thought it'd be about the depression that Meghan suffered. I wonder if they had walked into that argument and hadn't quite understood what they were unleashing when he made that remark about a member of the royal family.
Well, she made the remark, actually, didn't she?
No, she made it too.
She made it, and then he
Mm-hmm.
supported it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you think that's a possibility?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I don't think she realised what she was actually saying, because on one hand, you know, she's making an accusation against Harry's family. You know, she's making that accusation at royal family. What do they want out of this? This is the question, because I'm really confused. What do they want? Because I know in the, I think it was in the episode 5, he actually mentioned that there is no accountability and they're not going to stand up for what they've done. But what is it that they believe that the royal family has done? Who is this accusation that they're making against?
It's vague, isn't it? And so many unanswered questions. Going back to that question about the child and the skin's colour, would you regard that if a relative in your family, if you were going to have a baby and you're married to a white guy, you had a white partner, would you be mortally offended and think it was racist if someone said, is my grandson going to be more the colour of you or more the colour of my son?
No, of course not. You see, the thing is, we have to understand what context that is. And just to say, my children also are mixed race.
Right.
So, you know, I've got 3 children and all of them are all different colours. That's what happens. And it depends on what lens you're actually looking at this from. Was she in a position to go, oh, this is the moment that I'm going to take this personally? Or is she not? I mean, but she's also mixed race. These are...
So is a problem that it was the royal family had that chat about her? Because in the first episode, she describes how she's fairer skinned than Doria, her mother, doesn't she? She talks about it. It's a conversation that happens.
Yeah.
So why is that different to what the royal family discussed privately? Is it because it was the royal family about her that was an imposition on her, do you think?
Yeah. It's like, you know, it's almost like I feel like, is this what she was thinking that people wanted to hear? Was this her move? Was this the move that she wanted to make?
Well, we're going to have to leave it there, but we could talk about it for all afternoon.
Yeah.
That's Bushra Sheikh, former BBC Apprentice candidate, of course, and a well-known anti-racism campaigner. And thank you very much, because I've really enjoyed talking to you. Now, coming up, it's usually the busiest time of the year for retailers. Many of our shops are struggling. And the rail strike, of course, is not going to help if you're listening, Mr Mick Lynch. I hope you've done your Christmas shopping. We're going to hear from our business and economics editor.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by 2 of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Well, Christmas can often be make or break for British retailers as shoppers flock to the high street, but last month's sales saw a surprise fall. They dropped nearly 0.5% according to data from the Office for National Statistics. Is this the cost of living crisis starting to bite? Of course, we've got a train strike at the moment which won't help either. Our business and economics editor, Liam Halligan, is with me in the studio with On the Money. Liam, hello. Liam Halligan's with me in the studio.
Great to be with you, Andrew.
Yeah, well, great to be with you. This is a big surprise, isn't it? Because didn't we have Black Friday? Wasn't that supposed to kick-start sales?
It is a bit of a surprise because lots of people have been talking anecdotally about households stocking up for Christmas, knowing that food prices are rising. So you get your stuff in early, obviously not your turkey, but you can get in the non-fresh food in early. And in November, that did increase food sales. Food sales, they are up by almost 1%. But as you say, overall retail sales were down. And you know, Andrew, this is our first COVID-free Christmas for 3 years, but it does feel as if there's a bit of a downer, not just because of the train strikes and the other industrial action, the fact that postal strikes have messed with everybody's Christmas card writing schedules and all the rest of it, but just because we are in the middle of a serious cost of living squeeze. It's the most serious cost of living squeeze since the Second World War. It's worse in terms of the impact on real incomes than during the late 1970s. And I think people are just taking it a bit easy this Christmas because they're a bit worried about that credit card bill hitting them out in January when their electricity and gas bills will also be
Because that's the other worry. It's got cold.
Yeah.
And so people are worried about their heating bill. And we've just had the Bank of England raise interest rates again by 0.5%. That's going to add to people's mortgages. It's going to add to the cost of borrowing on their credit card, which is what they're doing every time they use their credit card.
This is what inflation does. It erodes purchasing power in the most simple sense. Look, average wages across the economy are going up by 5 or 6%, depending on whether or not you include bonuses. But when inflation's 10%, that means there's a real terms after inflation pay cut going on, so people have less to spend. At the same time, companies are investing less. A lot of business leaders I talk to, they talk of an investment strike. They've got cash ready to invest, but they're worried about the outlook. They're worried about turmoil politically here in the UK and beyond. They're worried about a possible energy price spike in the new year if the situation deteriorates seriously between Russia and the rest of the world. Russia, of course, now working hand in glove with the OPEC exporters cartel, of which they're not a member, but they're working as OPEC Plus to try and keep oil prices high. So there's lots of things pushing down on economic sentiment. I mean, I'm actually relatively reassured that there hasn't been a sharper fall in retail sales here, given the extent of the cost of living squeeze. It may be that even though the headline today is that retail sales are down despite Black Friday, it may be that the real headline will be in the spring of 2023 when consumer debt and consumer default hits an all-time high.
Let's bring in Chris for Hope. For a Tory government, economic competence, being clever, cautious custodians of the economy is everything for them at the ballot box. But if you look at the polls, they're trailing Labour now on who's best placed to run
They're
the
still
economy.
being blamed from the September 23rd autumn statement by Kwasi Kwarteng, aren't they? That hasn't gone away.
Yeah.
That is a real problem, and yet that was a confluence of pressure on the government from the international markets, and it became an issue of competency, which is maybe unfairly tarred with them. I think that Jeremy Hunt has spent a lot of time rebuilding trust in the UK economy with the markets. Interestingly, when he talks about inflation, he mentions all the macroeconomic factors that Liam knows about the war in Ukraine and elsewhere, and how that's pushing prices higher. I think that they are restoring confidence. The pound is back to where it was back in July against the dollar, and I wonder whether the fact they're now more competent is putting more pressure on Keir Starmer to find an alternative idea, because until now all he's done is present himself as a competent future PM, and that worked in the polls. That may be a problem next year.
Just in 20 seconds, Liam, what do you predict for interest rates next month? Are they going to go up again?
Well, we had 2 of the 9 members on the Monetary Policy Committee actually voted for no increase in interest rates.
Right.
Another one of the 9 voted for an increase that was bigger than the one we actually had. The committee's completely split. It may be, I'm chancing my arm, Andrew, it may be that because the economy is slowing so significantly, that inflation may have peaked. In the UK and the US and the Eurozone, the big 3 areas that we follow closely, in every case, inflation in November was lower than inflation in October. And that, I think, is a sign that the cycle may have turned.
Well, that's an encouraging note to end on. Now, the number of migrant fatalities in the Channel is growing. 4 people pronounced dead this week. Is enough being done to tackle illegal crossings? All that and more. But first, your latest news update.
It's exactly 1:33. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Passengers travelling by train are being disrupted by a fresh round of strikes. Members of the UK's biggest rail union, the RMT, have walked off the job for 48 hours. That's after talks failed to resolve a dispute over pay and conditions. Services across the UK are severely disrupted, with no trains at all running in some areas. Passengers are being urged not to travel unless absolutely necessary. A man has been jailed for life with a minimum term of 23 years for murdering his work colleague. Ross McCullum killed Megan Newborough at his parents' home in Colville in Leicestershire in August last year. He'd been dating the 23-year-old for less than a month. Her family say they're the ones serving the life sentence. That's when he was convicted on Monday. The victims of a suspected triple murder in Northamptonshire have been named by police as Anju Asuk and her 2 young children, Jiva and Janvi Saju. They were found with serious injuries at an address in Kettering yesterday morning. The 52-year-old man is being questioned in connection with their deaths. And 4 people are in a critical condition after a suspected crowd crush at a music venue in South London. Police were called to the Brixton O2 Academy last night following reports a large number of people were trying to force their way into a concert. The Met Police has launched an investigation and plans to review CCTV images of the incident. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2166 and €1.1461. The price of gold is £1,467.50 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 sits 7,337 points.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Well, police are investigating the deaths of 4 people in the Channel after the small boat they were in capsized on Wednesday. 39 people were rescued from the boat, including 12 children. As you should know, the number of people crossing the Channel since the beginning of the year has passed 45,000. Outrageous. The government has been talking tough, of course, yet again, on tackling illegal migration, but they don't appear to be doing anything about it. Don't we need a bit more substance? Well, joining me now is the human rights lawyer, Yvonne Sampson. Yvonne, you're very welcome. You say it's quite simple, and you can tell the government, who will be listening, how to do it.
Yes, look, there's legal migration, people are genuine, who are not genuine. The genuine ones, we've got to assess it quickly, decide it within a reasonable time. That's not being done. There's 120,000 backlog at the moment with a determination rate of 4%. 20 years ago, they were dealing with 100,000 a year within 6 months making decisions. So something's clearly gone wrong. Now, those that are not legal, those who are not genuine, you can remove them within a couple of weeks. It can be done. The Albanian problem. Albania is on the white list. That means that any asylum claim from an Albanian is not justified.
Because it's a safe country, no conflict, no war.
Absolutely, and the Home Office can certify that without any rights of appeal. That's the law as it stands today.
But what if they say they've been trafficked there under the Human Slavery Act?
Yes. So what you need to do is combine the national referral mechanism under the anti-trafficking laws and the Refugee Convention into one.
Right.
So you certify both at the same time. I mean, there are some people that are trafficked. You need people to determine and decide these cases within a reasonable time. The police are involved in this. Most police officers, and I'm going to get told off for this, don't understand what human trafficking is or how the national referral mechanism works. So it's down to training, having a task force to deal with it, certifying both claims simultaneously, detaining people for that period of 2 weeks, and then removing them to Albania.
Where do you detain them?
I'm not a person who's involved in detention, but they need to be detained.
The point being also, if they say, I've been trafficked here against my will, Why can't we just help them say, right, great, we'll put you straight in a plane back to your home in Albania?
Because a lot of them will say their family's under threat in Albania. So the gangs that are bringing them over here hold them to ransom. So if they don't do the work, which is mostly the building trade, then their families are harmed back in Albania. So there are some people genuine, and I've dealt with them. You know, when I had a client who had his fingers chopped off in working, he couldn't go and have NHS treatment. So they had to deal with severed fingers himself.
They chopped his fingers off in this country?
No, it was...
in Albania?
No, here. He was working, and it was an industrial accident.
Yeah, I get you.
But the point is, he couldn't get NHS treatment. So there are some genuine people. 20 years he's been here, this chap, kept in a shed, made to work, put back in the shed. And so there are genuine people who've been trafficked. You've got to be careful.
What of the suggestion that we could make these people, instead of putting them in hotels, instead of giving them some benefits money, actually get them doing some work, get them in the fields, pulling the cabbages and the potatoes out of the ground?
Indeed, look, the US does that. So if you claim asylum in the United States, you're entitled to work. You have to pay your own way. Why can't those claiming refugee status do exactly that?
And if they won't do the work, kick them out.
Well, again, we've got laws to comply with, Andrew, so we've got to comply with the law. We can't just kick people out. You know, the Rwanda policy, it was first thought of such a policy by Himmler and Heydrich back in the Second World War. So they wanted to send the refugees to Madagascar. This is nothing new. And so this whole policy is unlawful, pushback's unlawful, criminalising refugees is unlawful. What we need to do is to work within the law, have a system to decide, detain, decide and remove.
That's a bit scary. You can't compare with the Nazis.
Well, I was going to say...
The point is... that I didn't mean to compare Jews to that, but what the point I'm making is this idea of getting rid of a problem race and throwing them out to another country...
It's not racial, though, is it? I mean, it's not a race issue.
No, it's not a race, and the comparison ends there.
Yeah.
The point is that you can't just remove people because they're a problem to you.
To what extent is your trade, your profession to blame? Is it the rise of lawyers exploiting human rights laws and laws that these immigrants must receive when they get here, these rights, and that's stopping and slowing down the processing of the migrants?
I don't agree with that. Look, we work with Matrix Law, the leading chambers involved with the
Sherry
Rwanda...
Blair's favourite law firm?
She's not there anymore. Matrix, they dealt with all the Rwanda removals. It was because of Matrix that those flights were stopped, because of human rights. These are people who haven't got a voice. So you need to have justice and fairness in any society. It's not what we do.
But why is it fair for lawyers to be able to stop the government enforcing the will, its political will is to deport people to Rwanda as a deterrent so that fewer people cross the channel, fewer people exposed to dying. Rwanda is a safe country. Not that many will be able to go in any case. Why are lawyers allowed to stop the flight on the runway?
Well, I take attention about your assessment of Rwanda being a safe country. It isn't.
Yes, it is.
If you look at the human rights reports, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Liberty, you'll read that there's extrajudicial killings in Rwanda. And they actually bring people back to Rwanda who claim asylum from Rwanda and then also torture them. They're not like us. They don't have fairness at the heart of their government. And they are an oppressive, breaching human rights.
Denmark, a very civilised country, is considering exactly the same policy.
Well, if Denmark breaks the law, shall we do the same?
Well, why do we have to follow laws set by the Europe? I mean, what's going to happen here, I think, Arvin, is we're going to be pulled out of the European Court of Human Rights. That's what's going to happen, so that it can be left to the British judiciary to decide.
Yeah. If that happens, that's for Parliament to decide. But the point is this: we've got to uphold the law, Andrew.
Yeah, but why do we need 40 judges from other countries telling this government what it can and can't do with its borders?
Yes, I agree. The Refugee Convention is not fit for purpose anymore. I've said it before, and I've been told off by my colleagues, the human rights lawyers. We need to come out of it. We need to have our own laws on refugees. We need to have our own systems of removal. And so that may involve tweaking the Human Rights Act, maybe having a Bill of Rights. But the fundamental principles of the Human Rights Act is to protect you and me, not just refugees. It's to protect all of us.
You see, I think British judges can do that job just as well as 40 judges.
I agree.
Krista Hope, if the Tories don't sort this wretched situation out, they are going to be very heavily punished at the next general election, and so they should be.
There are two issues which will decide the next election, Andrew Pearce. Obviously, it's immigration and it's taxation.
Yeah.
Right now, it's immigration. taxation is for a year's time, looking into the 2024. Right now, it's about immigration. That's why you saw 70 Tory MPs voting on Monday, a gesture, really, vote to try and say, why can't we ignore the ECHR in this narrow point, this derogation on the issue of migrants' rights? And I wonder that's where it's going. I think people look at the way that the Strasbourg courts frustrated that first flight to Rwanda. Who was the judge who did it? No one knows.
Just finally to you, Ivan Sampson, you say it can be sorted out in 2 weeks. Wouldn't the money we're giving to the French government, which seems to be going straight down the French drain, be better spent, the 80-odd million, getting well-trained officers to process these asylum applications in Dover?
Absolutely. Look, on Tuesday, I was in court. A legal person here, married a British national, not entitled to be here. If I was the Home Office, I would put a really strong case to have that case determined against him. Guess what? Nobody from the Home Office turned up. And that happens frequently now. They don't have the right people trained properly to fight these applications. So it was a pretty easy day for me in court.
Right.
I had no one opposing me.
Extraordinary. But why are we not surprised by the Home Office, which is not fit for purpose and hasn't been for... Was it John Reid said it? As
well, 2005, 2006.
Yeah, absolutely.
We all agree.
We all do. We agree for once on GBNews. Ivan Sampson, thank you so much for coming in, and I hope we can talk again. Now, the village of Cottingham in East Yorkshire has become one of the first places in the UK to open a banking hub. It's a new concept facility following successful pilots in Scotland and Essex to counter the loss of individual banks and communities after a cost-cutting drive has left fewer than 6,000 banking branches across the UK, which I actually think is outrageous when you consider the profits they're making. Anna Riley has the story.
I declare this centre, this hub, open.
Woo! Fanfare and furore for the opening of Britain's newest banking hub. After the closure of all its banks, Cottingham in East Yorkshire has become the fourth centre in the UK to provide this facility to keep cash viable and allow customers to still access face-to-face banking services.
The banks themselves will find it will actually generate more business and more money. The post offices will like it because it will bring people into the post office as well. So, so I think all told, it will work very well indeed. It's a clever answer to what was turning into a real problem, which is the absence of banks on the high street, the absence of access to cash, the absence of all the things that many of us have grown up with and are uncomfortable without. So it's a great idea, and because it's a great idea, the customer will make it work.
The hubs are operated by postmasters, with banks providing staff on a rotating basis for all customer banking needs.
Well, I like seeing somebody in person. Yes, it's a different experience.
I do like the human touch. I think it's still very important in this age, and I'm sure a lot of people in my age group will appreciate that they can still handle checks with human hands.
It's nice when you can go into the bank and think, oh, good, I can draw it out.
With more than 5 million people in the UK relying on cash every day, the banking hubs have shown that hard money is still crucial in society.
Cost of living crisis is really starting to bite. It's much easier for some people to budget in cash and see money in front of them and to use that day in, day out. The other thing we see is, while there's lots of customers who want to use cash, they need businesses that are willing to take it. And for that to work, a business needs an easy way of depositing that cash at the end of the day. And therefore, local facilities like this make a real difference.
The Cash Action Group led the banking hub pilots and see them having a permanent place on the high street.
Banking hubs really are here to support those communities where there's no branch left. They are put in place where we've identified the need, where there is no ability to transact to that level anymore. And I think they are a really positive thing for the future. Look forward to supporting a lot more communities over the next few years. And you've seen how popular they can be through the pilots and through these 2 new hubs we've just opened.
There's another 25 banking hubs due to open across Britain so far, all aimed at protecting the future of cash and preserving in-person banking services. Anna Riley, GB News, Cottingham.
Well, let's get your views on the topics of the day. Gordon says, why on earth are trafficker boats carrying migrants not intercepted in transit? On strikes, Max says the Royal College of Nursing must have known that the government could never accept a 19% pay increase on top of the pay rises in the previous 2 years. By setting that 19% to their members, industrial action became inevitable. You're right, completely unrealistic. On Meghan and Harry, an awful lot of people talking about them. Avril says, wake up! The situation with Harry and Meghan, you're all missing the huge elephant in the room. It's Kate who's called to all this, and William is in a difficult situation and supported his wife like Harry supported his. It's not Kate. She's fantastic. She's the best thing about the royal family, Avril. John says, Meghan's own family called her out for what she really is. She's manipulative and always acting. She can take some people in, but not the rest of us. Poor Harry. He was one of her victims. He used to be so popular too. And Betty says, Harry was a captain in the army and served 2 tours in Afghanistan, yet he was scared of his brother shouting at him. Really? Thanks to all of you for getting in touch. Christopher Hope with me the last couple of minutes. There was a by-election yesterday in Urmston and Stretford, a suburb of Manchester. Labour won it comfortably. Appalling turnout of 25%.
It's the weather.
Right.
Outside of London, it's like Narnia. I mean, lots of...
But it's all about the swing, Chris, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, for Labour to win the election with an overall majority, they need a swing of, what, 12.5%, something like that? What was the swing?
About 10%. It wasn't enough.
Not enough.
And it's a wake-up call slightly for Labour and being complacent about winning the next election. I do think that, as we say, the pound is back to where with the dollar back in July. I think there's a lot of... there's competency returned to the government. Previously, the past 12 months, Keir Starmer sat there looking competent, and that's allowed him to convince people he can be a good PM. What will he do next? Because when you have a competent PM in Sunak, where does Labour go?
He's relying on that old truism that it's not oppositions who win elections, it's governments who lose them, and they have been an utter shambles for some time. But I agree with you.
And we thought the same of the Tories back in 1991. You'll remember that very clearly, Andrew.
I do.
And I do as well. I mean, I think that is Starmer Blair, or is he more likely to be Kinnock? And I wonder whether it's the latter. So we want to see... But also, equally, Sunak's got to do something to show Tory MPs what he believes in. We're not really clear.
Well, then he's made that very bold public pledge he will get rid of that backlog of asylum applications by the end of next year.
That's right. Well, he's got to do that. That's in a line in the sand. That's immigration. The next piece is taxation and make it easier for the so-called squeeze middle, to quote Ed Miliband from the old days.
Yes, because a lot of the horrible stuff in the budget doesn't kick in till next year.
In April, and that gives Jeremy Hunt a chance in a March budget to say, well, we did this to reassure the markets. Let's not go so far as we were going to go on CGT, on pensions, attacking pensions and the rest of it. So he may pull back from some of those tax rises in March, and that's with the pressure. But we're waiting for this big moment from the government. And talking's over. Let's see some action from Sunak.
Yeah.
What do you believe in? How can you inspire the troops? That's what the Tories want to see.
And just finally, Chris, has the Tory party MPs embraced Sunak? He got far more votes than Liz Truss. But there's still a sizable...
They liked him on Wednesday. There was a meeting, the 1922 meeting this week.
And have the Boris diehards given up hope on the blonde bombshell making a dramatic return?
Members were not going to have a choice over Sunak. Don't forget, he didn't beat Liz Truss. Jeremy Hunt came last in the July leadership election. There were 2 people there who members rejected this year. They're now the PM and Chancellor. That doesn't make them happy. There's still a hope for Boris Johnson. I'm looking at the May local election in 2024. 7,000 council seats, 4,000 Tory ones. If it's a disaster for Sunak, if they're still 20 points behind, I can see the return of a blonde bombshell next
year. Now there's a bombshell to end on. Chris Hope saying we could see, if the May elections go badly for Rishi Sunak, the return of Boris. Well, that would be fascinating, and what a great story. A 4th Prime Minister in 12 months for the Tories. Chris Hope, thanks for coming in. You'll come again. He's from the Daily Telegraph. Read his very good column in the Telegraph. You've been watching me. I'm Andrew Pearce. Thanks for sticking with us. Next, it's the briefing with Arlene Foster. Before that, though, the very cold weather.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather updates. It's been snowing heavily across some parts of Scotland. That is now starting to ease. For most, it is a dry and a cold day once more. Milder weather, though, is on the way, courtesy of an area of low pressure out in the Atlantic. But ahead of that, it's still cold. We've got high pressure bringing most places a dry day today, but this low up to the northwest and these weather fronts have introduced quite a bit of wet weather to western Scotland. Still snowing heavily across just to the north of the central belt through the hills here and elsewhere at lower levels, turning more back to rain. But still, things could be quite icy and still, as I say, some snow to come. Much of northern Scotland dry, the odd shower for northern parts of Northern Ireland, North Wales, but for most it's dry, sunny and cold, with temperatures again struggling to get much above freezing. Now, as we go through the evening, we'll see more of this wet weather pushing into southern Scotland and then sinking southwards. Again, mostly rain at low levels, but some snow over the southern uplands, the Cumbrian mountains, and by the end of the night into parts of the Pennines as well. Further south, again, most places dry. Cold, once more, widespread hard frost. Southeast England, East Anglia, rural spots and northeast Scotland could get to negative double figures once more. So another cold day to come tomorrow, a cold Saturday with some wet weather over northern England and North Wales. Again, mostly at low levels this will be rain, but some snow over the hills and it could be icy. So just bear that in mind, especially on those trans-Pennine routes. More snow showers over the Highlands also. Elsewhere, much of the south and much of the east will be dry and bright on Saturday, but another cold day. That is about to change though, because low pressure systems coming in from the southwest are going to mix things